All right, let's talk about something. Who wants to have your clients actually listen to you? Right? Anybody, right? Anybody notice there's a challenge with that? So there's a challenge a lot of times with what's happening. The client's not doing what we want. And I've had a big aha with this lately. I've been studying this a lot lately and just looking back, hey, what's the biggest weakness? And obviously I have some challenge on the listing side. The last 6 or 8 months of getting listings priced correctly to come down where they need to, and the client to actually listen to that. But the same thing the buyer side. Offers written to offer acceptance, moving forward, sticking with the deal, not blowing up. And so I want to talk about today just a way to get clients to help listen to you and actually trust your advice. The biggest challenge with agents is what with consumers, you think? What's the biggest problem for agents just from the consumer mindset, you think? They look at agents as just a commodity. So they look at you, right? And the problem outside of here, outside of our office, most agents just what? Order takers. They're order takers. They're door openers. They just do whatever the client tells them to. They're desperate. They sell 4 houses a year. And so today I want to talk about the proof matrix. It's super important. This is obviously very helpful on the listing side, but very helpful on the buyer side as well. I've really kind of dug into this the past couple months. So I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on and how do I fix it, right? And so it's a big problem with people in our industry because you're seeing shifts in the marketplace, but also you're seeing a lot of resistance. But the big challenge you're seeing, it's a very high ticket item with a long sales cycle with lots of resistance. And so what does that mean? There's a lot of opportunity for the client not to trust you, not to want to listen to you, okay? And so you got to get very, very, very good at creating this scenario where there's proof, okay? So what's happening is you're telling your clients these things, and what's happening? They don't believe you. So they look at you in the face, they shake their head yes or no, and then they go back behind your back, and what do? Talk to each other about how what you're saying is not true, and that's not the case. And ultimately, in many cases, they end up turning on you. So you happen over and over and over. Listings looking to say we've got 155 listings total of everybody. And so you got $50 million worth of real estate that's not pending. What is the reason for that? It's the reality of that the proof has not been proven to them of why they're overpriced where they're at. The most of them are just the reality they're not listening. And so I've seen this happen through a couple people on the listing side. I taught it, said it, and it still didn't get done. On this next thing I'm going to show you. Jeremy's done very well at it because he does exactly what I showed him what I did, and it's worked pretty well. What's the single most important part if I'm giving something proof-wise to somebody? If I need to change their mind, I need to get to where I want, what's the single most important thing you think? It's got to be visual. It's got to be visual. Why? They don't believe you, right? They sent an email to the client about reducing the price. Guess what wasn't in there? A visual. What's the problem with that? They don't know how to read comms. They don't even know what the hell. They don't believe your comms even if they could halfway read it. I'm in real estate. I'm the one that runs a team, and I couldn't read both their examples and what they were sending. I couldn't comprehend what they were trying to say. And I'm the one that runs the team. So is it likely the client's going to drop the price? So I want to really break this down why it's so important. It's got to be visual. So what does that mean? It's got to be visual. It's got to have very simple images. I'm going to stack this for you guys, but images that what? Explain it at a 5th grade level. I'd almost push you like 2nd grade level. It's got to be so stupid that your kid who's 5 years old, 6 years old can look at this and say, okay, this makes sense. Why? They're so emotional about the transaction, they're looking for every single thing that makes it invalid. If there's one single thing you miss in the story or the process, it makes whatever you're saying invalid.
They still don't believe it.
They're searching for the one thing to invalidate you to make their story right. They're so emotionally attached to their outcome that they want. They're just looking right through rose-colored glasses to try to find the one hole in your story or your hole in your situation that justifies what they want to believe. And if they find that, what happens? They discredit what you're saying. Even though you're 99% right, 1% there, they're going to discredit what you're saying to get what they want. Same thing buyer side. What do the buyers tell you about their houses you're looking at?
Oh, I feel X, Y, and Z.
This needs $30,000 worth of work, right? This thing's way overpriced. And ultimately, based on the data, what is it? Is it overpriced that much?
No.
Most time it's not. And then what do we try to do? Argue with them without what? Visual data that's inarguable. Does this make sense? Let me ask you this. Which comps did you use for that price? And a lot of times they don't know. Why? Because all of their decision making is based on what? Emotion. We have to be able to strip that, take them from fantasy to fact. They're living in fantasy, which is an emotional place, which is where they get very, very angry. And so the second piece of this, it's got to be very specific. What does that mean? This data's got to be whatever your outcome needs to be. It's got to be market stats that do what? Tell the story that I need to sell to get the outcome I desire. Does that make sense? So I'm getting price reductions. It needs to be about very, very important data with the market that justifies that. Perfect example. Showed this lady last week, Berkshire Forest. Her neighborhood has like, what, 30-something houses listed? She's way overpriced. Why is that? Well, because sales in her zip code were down 40%, right? 39% last 12 months. There's one piece of data that shows median price is up 4%. Guess what she argued with me about? Well, shit, if sales are down 40% and you got this much more competition with 40 other houses, and you're $40 per square foot higher than everybody else, what do you think is going to happen, right? And so that's the key part here is you have to make sure that you're understanding the visual part. It's got to make sure it's got to be very specific to what it is. The data, right? You have 30-something houses in your neighborhood. Your price per square foot is $209. The average is like $180, right? And so that's important. It's got to be very specific to what their situation is, okay? And so third piece here, it's got to be very easy to understand. What does that mean? It's got to be 6 times easier than that. So you think the consumer is just going to open a PDF that's 33 pages and read the shit and know what's going on? Right? But there's no visual data that makes it, okay, here's these 3 graphs, these 4 things that understand here's what's happening, okay? And it's got to be very, very obvious. So if there's 15 things on the visual, I need 6 arrows to go to the one piece of data I need. Does this make sense? Is that overkill? No. Because they have to see it. It's like you're forcing to look at what they don't want to look at. It's got to be that. Why? Because they don't want to believe that. And so you have to make sure you're very, very good at understanding this part. Now here's the fourth part. You have to make sure you stack proof. What does that mean?
One example.
It's got to be layer after layer after layer after layer as much as you can find. 1 article is not good enough. Okay? 1 article is not good enough. 2 articles not good enough. 3 things aren't good enough. 3 pieces of data is not good enough because I can give them 5 in a row and they'll try to pick the one that they want to believe. Does it make sense? And so you have to make sure now what part of this is going to be in here. There's 2 types. The ones be local, which we'll call micro market data. And you need right now, a big one right now is macro, which is what? National data. What's happening in the marketplace as a whole. Okay? Very, very important. You're seeing a slowdown in some areas for listings, lots of competition. We're very insulated here with some sales, but what's the problem with our market if you're a home seller? New construction's dominating. Right? They're selling the same thing in the same neighborhood, in many cases $40,000 less than what they paid for 2 years ago. Major problem, right? Which one's the buyer going to buy? And so that's the key thing you have to understand. Like some of the data is not real because a lot of this new construction data coming in. Does that make sense? And so you got to be able to sell a story. Now if I'm a buyer, you can use the same exact thing on the buy side. But if you're getting listings, which all of you will, at some point you got to be very, very good at this. Okay? Because this is where the big problems come in for most people. And then what do I do with this? At the end of the visual, which all this is going to be visual, I have to do something. What do I got to do? Video overlay. Why? And I learned this the hard way. So I put all this together in an email. I'd send it to Matt and say, Matt, let's hop on a call at 2 o'clock. And I go through the data and I get to the second graph. What do you think they do? They want to butt this and butt that, just like you're at the house. Well, hey, have you seen my granite? It's the absolute best granite in the world. See this coat closet at the front door? Absolute best coat closet you ever seen in the whole world, right? Because why? They're delusional about what they believe, right? We always joke no one thinks their own kid's ugly. It's the same exact thing from the house, right? It's true. So the key part here is that they think theirs is the absolute best. You have to make sure that you're able to break that up, okay? Second piece of this, just because the visual data is there, guess what? They won't understand the data. So what do you got to do? Overlay the entire email to them in a video so they can't miss it. And then what do?
Send it to them.
Then what? Call them. Hey, Ryan, take a look at the video yet? No. Hey, I'm going to hang up the phone. Once you watch it, I'll call you back in 3 minutes. Right? Very important because I need it to be one way, one-to-one with them. So that they go through it, they consume the whole thing at one time so they can understand it. Then we discuss it. Then what do? Overcome any objections you have at that point. That makes sense? But it works. It's very powerful. This is true for your offers written to offer accepted. Any listing that you have, whatever it is. If the listing's not selling, what's the reason? That's it. Unless you screw something up in the listing, like, bedroom size, square footage, photos, it's price. Always price, okay? There's no magical thing you can do to get it done. It's just reality. You just got to be competitive. Why? Because buyers are smart. Okay? Very, very important piece here. It's got to be indisputable. What does that mean? What's the number one problem we know? They don't trust you, right? So they don't trust you, what I got to do?
Show them the data.
Show them something from somebody they can trust. Does that make sense? And so they don't want to trust me because they're so emotionally attached to whatever it is. They want to believe that's anything, everything else besides what the fact is, right? So here, it's got to be from a third party. Very important. If you make it up, what happens? They don't believe it. They think you're lying. So that would be things like what? MLS data. It would be things like InfoSparks. More importantly, most recently, I've gone to things online from experts. So it would be things like national people who understand the market, like thought leaders, their reporting, their data, big chart companies, things like that I'm using. Because in today's time, they're going to take what you say and they're going to put it in ChatGPT or something else, and what do you think they're going to look for? The answer they want. Now, what's the problem with ChatGPT and AI? Tells you what you want to hear. I can word anything to make it look like I want it to look. And so you got to understand that for your side of the advantage, but also pre-frame them. If they start coming back, I can ask ChatGPT to give me anything I want based on how I asked the question. And so this is why it's got to be so indisputable and from a third party who's what? Who's an expert. Okay? Expert. Very important, okay? Second piece of this. It's got to be airtight. What does that mean? You have to make sure you're building a case. So if I'm in the police force, I'm a detective, and I'm trying to build something, right? And I'm trying to put these facts together that are these clues or this part of the case, what do I got to do?
You got to assemble it in an indisputable fashion.
I got to assemble it in an indisputable fashion so that when anybody looks at it, they can't find a hole of what's not true about it. Does that make sense? Because they don't care what you say in there. They're not looking at this like, wow, let me see what Mike sent me. This makes a whole lot of sense. What are they thinking? I don't believe the damn thing he's saying. I'm going to find the one thing is wrong with this. And if they find the one thing is wrong with it, right, not guilty. And that's how they're viewing you with this data. I'm just telling you, I've seen it over and over. Why? Because they don't want to believe the facts. They want to believe the fantasy. And they're so attached to the fantasy that they'll fight tooth and nail against you to argue with it. Does that make sense? And so I have to be so good that I'm looking like in front of a grand jury. Not only do I get the grand jury to allow me to get the case moved forward, I got to get a guilty verdict. And if I leave one hole in the case, what happens?
It's gone.
Gone, right? And so that's where you have to understand this got to be very, very specific, and it's airtight. Airtight means all the pieces line up. I think through it. I can even ask ChatGPT about it. Hey, look, here's my case. Here's what I'm saying. Help me fine-tune this for me. What holes can you see in this? If you're a homeowner who's emotionally attached to their home, don't want to believe it, what would you think? What hole can you find in it? You need to figure out a way to make sure that you're able to get through this in a way. Third piece here. Third piece. Very important. Needs to be data-driven. What does that mean? Numbers are hard to argue with. They can argue with emotion. Here's the thing. I can get 6 feedbacks that all say that property's priced too high. And what do they tell me? My neighbor's house sold for XYZ. And so even though all 6 buyers, 100% of buyers came through your house think your property's overpriced, you still think it's higher, right? So it has to be numbers driven, meaning that I have to layer in data. That data is inarguable, okay? It's indisputable. So what does that mean? I got to get very good at the data that gives me the outcome I need. I'm not saying manipulate it. I'm saying you got to look at the data in a way where you're smart enough to understand, okay, what's the data actually telling me and what's the outcome I need. So if the data is showing me I am overpriced, I need to make sure I put that together in a way. If the data says I'm not overpriced, then figure out what? What's the real problem that's causing this? Is it the house, quality, condition, or I'm using the wrong data? Make sense? For example, if you look at sales, in our Horry County, in our entire MLS last month, anybody know what they are for resale homes? No one knows the data from the friggin' MLS? Sales up over 4% last month. Closed deals, right? Yep, right? You with me on that? Anybody know what Carolina Forest was? I just told you. Down 39%. Right? So that's actual number of sales. So what does that tell me? Micro market matters. With me on this? So if I'm basing it on the data that's the entire MLS and shit's up 4%, I can't figure out what's going on. Well, shoot, if I'm in Carolina Forest, I got a major problem. Does that make sense? And so you have to be able to understand the data that I can look at to make the right decisions for me and my clients. Very, very important. And I'll show you how to do this in a minute. I'm going to give you guys a couple examples. And the fourth thing here, it's got to be very obvious. What does that mean? Yes, and so like Mike, going back to police days, right? If I know I got all these clues and those guys probably most likely guilty, and have all these separate clues I kind of know, but what's the problem?
You have to be able to communicate that to
A jury.
in a court.
And most of the time, look about this. What do attorneys pick for jurors?
What do they pick for jurors?
Yeah.
Liberal fucks.
The dumbest people you can ever get, right? But typically, they try to get the dumbest people on there, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree? Right? So think about this. So you have to be able to, and I don't want to get political with it, but you get my point, right? Is they try to find the dumbest people. Why? Because they can typically be manipulated the most. They're unsure, making a decision, making the most. They're less educated. That's just what attorneys typically do. I know because I've been a part of that, seen it. Okay? It's very important to understand. Now, is that fair? No, but obviously you want to think like that. Like, how do I make sure I'm like an attorney who puts this together, or a DA, right? Where I'm putting a case together and it lines up exactly, so simple that it's obvious that it's indisputable. Does that make sense? You've got to look at yourself as the district attorney or the defense attorney, whatever it is, you got to defend your case. But we're just going at it with what? Some half-ass agent who's just showing a few graphs and a PDF hoping to get a person to drop their largest asset, 50 grand. It doesn't work that way, right? And so it's the same thing with people buying it. They're looking at all the stuff online that's negative, or that, hey, look, this thing costs $30,000 to fix, and you don't have anything to go against that, you're totally screwed. Make sense? Now, what if I just go to ChatGPT and ask a question, get what I want? They're going to read right through that in 2 seconds. It's got to be very, very, very specific. Questions about that? I'm going to show you guys a real life example in a minute. Third piece of this. It's got to tell a story. What does that mean? Why do you think that's in there? Mike, what's one of the most important things that somebody has to do in a prosecution of a criminal case, you think?
You've got to be able to show chronology from the time you got the case and tell the story.
What's the key part, though? Motive. Motive. And the motive is driven by what? The story. So-and-so did this, he was raised by whatever, and he murdered the people, right? You got to talk about what made him mad to make them create the murder, whatever it is. In this situation, you got to understand, what story do I need these to tell so that they can follow it? Why?
You still got to convince them.
The story is what moves them, right? I can show them these graphs, but the graphs have to tell something. The market's going up, market's going down, right? Market's having this for these type of buyers, right? Resale versus new construction, whatever it is. I have to make sure I'm having the way that I'm able to tell the story with these two together. So these can't just be a bunch of graphs and photos that say the market's down. Why? Because they're going to dispute that and not believe it. You're just lying to me. You just want a price reduction. Or you just want me to overpay for this price. So you got to make sure you're understanding, okay, here's what the data says. Here's the story comes from. So the most important thing for them is you got to tell it in a way where you can explain it for a way that they have what we call self-discovery. What does that mean? They have to come to conclusion themselves. They have the whole shit moment like, man, dang, what she said is exactly right. This is exactly what I've been seeing. You have to have them consume the pieces in order, in a way that they can understand. Why? Because they're fighting it so much emotionally. You have to have the ability to shift. What am I looking to shift? Their worldview. What's the only way I can really shift the worldview? Questions and through a story, right? So I tell the story, and I do what? Ask questions. Make sense? And I do that in my video. Very important. So I had to up the story lately because people aren't believing it still, right? I've got 3 data sources that say your property is worth less than you are. Zillow says your house is worth less than you are. The price per square foot says the house is less than you are, and what do they still do? Argue with me, right? So I'm like, all right, well, what do you got to do? What's the next biggest thing? Well, now I got a bunch of national guys talking about, hey, here's the market's crashing, here's what's happening, here's what happened in Florida, right? Florida is having major problems here. Their prices are down, their market's crashing. So you have part of that. So here's all this data here that's leading us to this place. Guess what our data is now doing? Backing that up. By the way, condos prices down 13% year over year. Anything over 10% is considered what? Hey, by the way, here's your data on your house and your neighborhood. Your area is down 30%, whatever it is, right? What does that mean to you? Does this make sense? So what I've been doing lately, I layer in the national data, then I layer in their local data. Make sense? And so here's what's happening, and I align the two. That's what creates the worldview to switch them. What I noticed was I couldn't switch their worldview lately, and so I layered in the national. We're finally getting some actual traction. Because, and here's the thing, I'm not doing it to manipulate. I just know something has been really wrong with the listing prices that's not like it used to be. I've got $1 million worth of flips out right now that aren't selling either. So I'm like, something's going on, right? Something's different. And so the reality is like, all right, what am I missing? And so I started putting those pieces together. I started watching and looking and saving. So I saved all these documents, all these posts on Twitter, all these people that are talking about things that are happening in Florida, certain areas. So I'm like, all right, how do I put that together to make sure I get what I want here, and I want my client to be ahead of that? And so, for example, they have a condo. If they have a condo that's, let's say, $200,000 condo, prices are down 13%. In a 12-month period, what does that mean? They're losing $26,000 in value for every year they hold on to a condo right now. Well, what do you do better to make the story better?
$2,000 a month.
You're losing $2,000 a month holding on to this asset. Well, I know you don't got to sell. I know you like to keep the rental. I know you think the market's going to get better, but if the data, and then what do? I link the story to the reality. Why do you think condo prices are going down? Insurance is the number one reason we've seen for, right? Because houses aren't dropping like condos, so what's the main problem with condos? HOA's gone up, massive assessments, a lot of buyer fear. And so if we know that that has happened because a lot of carriers have left the state, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, do you think that that problem's going to fix itself anytime soon? So now I've educated them on how not only is the condo prices dropping nationally, they're dropping locally, right? They're also dropping here, and I've linked the problem of why they're dropping to them to their exact situation. And guess what I did? Added math to it. So now the math says you're losing $2,000 a month. So right now we can keep it where you're at. I know you don't want to drop the price to correct the price, but it's costing you $500 per week right now not to drop the price. And the problem is if I wait till next week to drop the price $500, guess what happens? I'm already behind another $500, so I'm actually down $1,000. And every 4 weeks you waste another $2,000, you're behind everyone else. And so that's where the story comes in. But you have to be good at this so that that's so indisputable. Like most people just put a couple graphs and say, oh yeah, market's down 13% in the last 12 months for condo prices, right? That's not good enough. Why? It doesn't change your worldview. So the worldview is where the story comes in, where the story links the data and the visuals to them. Does that make sense? Do you see insurance prices going down anytime soon? No. Do you see them fixing the problem anytime soon? No. So if we know that's the case, what do you think happens to condo prices? They go up or down. So it's not me telling them. They have to self-discover through what? Me asking questions. And so I can do this in the video, and then I fill the gaps on the telephone call. And I go back and forth, and every time they try to get off the straight line, I bring them back here to this line so we're able to be where we need to be. Does this make sense? Very, very important there. So third piece, it needs to make sure it has a narrative. I need to know what's the narrative behind the data. And here's the thing. Guess who picks a narrative? I do. Why? I need to pick the narrative based on what the outcome needs to be. And here's the thing. I'm not picking it to manipulate. I'm not picking it to just get them to get the price down. I'm doing the thing that needs to happen, and I need to put the pieces together so they can understand what's really happening. Why is that? Well, we know, like the example I'll show you in a minute, they're getting massive traffic online. They're outperforming 86% of listings on MLS. They only had 2 showings in like 24 weeks. That's a what problem? Price problem. Very simple. And so I have to find a way that I can educate them and show them, hey, here's what's happening and here's why it is the way it is. I need to put it to a narrative that they can understand. Why? Because people understand narratives better than they understand data. So the emotional decision they make is a shift of the worldview, and then the data is a justification. Does this make sense? But if I just do data, what happens? The emotion wins every time over the data. That's why I have to have the emotional narrative that's backed up by data. That's how I switch the worldview for people. Make sense? You're able to show them, here's the market, here's what the data says. Okay, let me ask you this. Why do you want to offer 85% of market value when the average property in this zip code is selling for 98% of listed price? Tell me how that works. And then now I'm able to ask questions, go back, shift them, do a presentation via video, what that is. Does that make sense, you guys? Very, very important piece there. What's the number one way to get somebody to change? Deeper. What's the number one way to get any human to change? You have to find the pain. You have to link this back up to their original motivation. That's why notes are so important. But here's a problem. You didn't put notes in 3 months ago and you met them 4 months ago, so now you're not really sure about the pain. So you have to make sure I'm linking it back to their pain of not moving or moving where they want to go. Or if it's a financial decision, them losing money, like for example, $2,000 a month in value. In addition to that, you're paying HOA. What's your HOA amount? $500. So now you're costing yourself $2,500 a month to hold on to this asset that you're losing money on. What would be a better outcome, right? So then the pain. Make sense? So this is very important to look at. It's very important, right? It's got to be the close. What does that mean?
Wrap it up.
You have to make sure this is aligned with what? An outcome. So none of this makes any sense unless I know what I need to get to. And so here's the crazy part. What do I want to do if I'm really good? I reverse engineer this entire thing based on what? Outcome. The price is too high. I need to get it down. So now I'm reverse engineering the story. I'm looking at the pieces here. I'm finding facts, searching for third parties, right? All these things, I'm going backwards so I can do what? Reverse engineer the outcome I need. So if you notice, all this shit's in order based on the consumer's view, what they need to see, starting from the actual end, which is where you need to start. Make sense? And so this is how you're able to do that, where I'm going to put the story together based on what I know and think's happening. So here, I usually have like what I would call a hypothesis. Make sense? So I'm going to know the market enough if I'm overpriced as a listing or if I have a buyer who needs to pay more money. Make sense? So like, what do we know about the problem market? There's high resistance. Buyers don't want to pay what it's worth. Sellers don't want to sell for what it's worth. And so I have to get good at doing what? You can use the same exact thing and send this to a listing agent if you're a buyer and say, look, dude, here's where you're priced at. You're priced X amount per square foot above the average price per square foot that's sold and the actives. And like what I'm seeing most of the time in these listings aren't selling, their price per square foot is above the average price per square foot in the neighborhood and sold significantly. And so it's a pretty easy story to put together, right? So now I'll go back, reverse engineer that, find the data. But what I'm noticing is the local data is not enough anymore. There's got to be a bigger piece to that. And what I'm finding is there's two main things right now. Number one is going to be national market data. And number two is economy. Make sense? So one of the big things you'll be talking about inflation, right? What's the number one way for any average person to hedge against inflation? Fixed assets, right? So that's one way to protect that. Now, the other problem, though, is I don't know what the hell's going to happen. To be honest with you, I've never seen the government this screwed up in my entire life, right? And so I don't really know what the hell's going to happen. You got one side of it where inflation's going through the roof, which means it would be a great idea to own a house. On the other side of it, you got where the economy could potentially collapse, right? So like, you don't really know. But I'm looking for find the data that tells me what the outcome is. And that's, I fully believe, I have a listing right now that needs to sell. I need to get them to sell earlier rather than later. Why is that? Because I'm seeing data in places like Florida that are showing prices decline a little bit. Florida has a more serious issue than we do with insurance. Why is that? They're further south. They're more of a hurricane belt. They get hit with more stuff, right? And so that's something that I'm looking at, and I'm advising my clients based on that to probably get out earlier rather than later. Make sense? We had somebody, they have a daughter that is dying of cancer in Virginia, and they had an offer on the property, and they wouldn't accept it because it was like $10,000 short, right? Like crazy, right? And so my job as the true expert in that is to be like, look, here's the data, here's what it says. You can wait another 4 months to see your daughter when she potentially dies, and guess what you're going to have in your pocket? Less money. So the last thing you're going to do is wait 4 more months and have less money in your pocket and miss out on your daughter being alive. But by the way, if you could write a check, spend 5 more months or 6 more months with your daughter for 10 grand, would you do it? Damn right you would. So what are we waiting on? So like that's why it's important to put all the pieces together. Their story, national story have to be together. Does it make sense? You guys don't know their pain. You think you know their pain, but not the real pain in many cases. Right? Wanting to buy a second home is not a pain. Right? Wanting to buy an investment is not a pain. You have to figure what their fears, what's driving them, what's making them look up at 3 o'clock in the morning on the internet, right? There's something deeper that you're not knowing about that you need to really get really good understanding so you can help them understand and get there. Very, very important piece here. Second piece here. You got to tell them the next steps. A lot of times people get to the worldview shift. They don't tell the next steps. So next steps would be what? We need to reduce the price to X. We make a price correction ASAP. We need to make an offer on this property of 97% based on the data. Right? Very important to understand this piece here. Why? If you do this right, and they read it and go through, they write back, and what's the number one question they ask? What do you recommend? And the reason I did that, I had to do 2 separate emails. I'm trying to do it for their listings, and so I'm having to do a national email, which kind of warms them up a little bit. Then I hit them with a second email, which is their comps on their property. Does that make sense? But the ones that read it, they immediately write back. You can see their worldview shift. The energy changes. Their openness changes because like, oh shit, they see the pieces come together, and now you're able to layer in the second part, which is, oh yeah, here's our next steps. All right. Last thing here, I want an alternate choice. Why?
They feel like they have part of the decision.
The human mind wants the shortest way to an outcome, right? So the human mind wants the shortest way. If I give them the open decision making, what happens to the human typically? They don't make a decision. So if I say, look, based on this, based on the database where we're at, we need to reduce the price to X or X. I have a client I have right now in Tidewater. Did it to her last week. We need to be here or here based on what it was. And she actually came back and said, this makes total sense. I'm tired of dealing with it. Go here, 330. My low is 340, I think. But that's because it was done very, very, very well, and she trusts me and trusts my advice. Does that make sense? And so that's the key thing of like, all right, that's a significant difference here where we're at, but it's important to understand where the data's at. Fourth piece, this is kind of what you have to make sure going here with them, is you have to make sure, how do I word it? The cost of waiting. Why is you got to put that in there?
Because they need to know what, like, how much it's going to cost them to let it just sit there.
Most people, when they're faced with a difficult decision, a lot of times tend to do what? Not make the decision. And so my job as an expert who guides them, who is leading them, is I need to make sure I understand, hey, look, here's where we need to go, here's the next steps, this or this, but here's the cost of not doing it. And in my opinion, here's what I think may happen. More competition, you miss out on this house, and now you're going to compare every house in the future to this one. You're going to regret not making it. I have so many clients like yourself. We've been searching for 2 years. They've seen prices go up. Whatever the scenario is, you got to make sure you're using this to understand the psychology. Okay? And then all this comes together with one thing I have to be willing to have. So this all sets up my case. Right, Mike?
Yep.
You've been in court a few times?
Yep.
What happens in court typically?
If you don't paint the facts consistent with the crime elements into a story that people can easily understand, then you'll never get a guilty conviction.
But you typically go to court, let's say it's a big, giant criminal case or a big civil case. Both sides have their stuff together. They go into court. What typically happens? There's a battle and there's a big collision. So this sets you up for you to have what? The collision with who? The client. So you got to be able to have your shit together, and you got to be willing and able to defend your case against them, or they're going to smash you. But what do most agents do? They half-ass this part, and so they get smashed in court. That's what I notice. At least in my experience, right? The agents that we were talking about before in listings, I look at their stuff, I'm like, how are you not getting reductions? What are they saying? And they sent me the email, I'm like, dude, this is terrible. This is nothing to what I showed you, right? So like, this is the way you got to do it so that you have a good way to put a case. And so if my case is indisputable and the video does it, I don't even need to go to court. That's when they just settle. So if they watch my email and they write back, hey, dude, this is a great point. Let's go ahead and reduce the price to X, Y, Z. That means they settled. That's a good outcome, right? And so if I go to court and I settle before you get there, that means they know, hey, they're probably right in what they do. But that doesn't mean I've lost just because they didn't settle before you get there. I still got a good chance to win the case in court. And so you got to be willing to defend your story and your case here with your clients in a way that you can get them where they want to be. Why? Why does that matter? I have an obligation to get the damn deal done, right? If they hire me to list their property and sell it, I feel I have an obligation to get them to sell it based on what the data says. So if I have a 6-month agreement, I'm a month 3, it's not selling, I have an obligation to collide with them to get them to price it where it needs to be so we get the job done. So they can go to Florida or see their kids or see their daughter who's got cancer. Right? That's important, but I have to be willing to have the backbone and the collision to have a conversation with them at a high level that gets them to understand what they want. Make sense? And I told the people this week multiple times, I said, hey, look, here's the deal. I'd rather you be pissed off at me and mad at me right now for telling you the truth than you mad at me at month 6 when it doesn't sell. That's been a power that I've been saying over and over and over to these people. Here's the deal. I'd rather you be mad at me right now for telling the truth than you mad at me in 6 months when it doesn't sell. Because if you don't listen to me, that's exactly what's going to happen. How do I know? The data says it right here. But you have to have conviction in how you do this. Does it make sense? Hey, Matt, watch this video. I'm going to be there at 3 o'clock, and you make sure you watch it before I get there. Right. Now they've consumed it. What this does, this basically shows them, hey, look, here's what my case is. What do you got? So they're more likely to settle once they see this. And you meet with them is much more effective. You need to send them this first, because if I go through it at the table with them one-to-one, it's very hard to put the case together. It's like allowing the defendant to talk the whole time during the case. So the first piece is making sure that you're layering this into them and that they understand that, and then you're able to go through the second way and go through it in detail with them. Does that make sense? And I've really been studying this like crazy. It all comes down to psychology. They get mad every single time. They get angry at you, and then all of a sudden it becomes an argument. What happens to the outcome? Because why? They don't want to hear the facts. It's much easier to blame you than it is to look at the facts, okay? And so the more I get better at this, and the more detail I get this, and so if you guys are struggling right now in any part with your buyer clients, seller clients, guess what you need to do? Master this and come back and watch this video. Make sense, you guys?